Ms. Friedman, when you're ready, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honors, before the break, I referred you to Vojan Vučković's statement, which implicates Marko Pejic, one of Arkan's SDG members, in crimes in Zvornik. Not only did the Serbian DB fail to arrest Pejic on the basis of this information, they issued per diem payments to him as a member of the SDG. Pejic's name appears at page 30 of Exhibit P541 and page 8 of P543. These are JATD payment lists for the period leading up to the Sanski Most operations from mid-August to mid-September 1995. Finally, Your Honors, the report compiled by Milorad Davidović in August 1992 about the situation in Bijeljina, Zvornik, and Brčko provides additional evidence of the Serbian DB's involvement in sending men to eastern Bosnia. Excerpts from this important piece of evidence appear on slide 79. The Davidović report demonstrates that members of the unit operated alongside members of the SDG in, quote, liberating these areas, unquote, and discusses the involvement of the Serbian MUP in sending these and other forces. Another passage at page 10 conveys Ivanović's statement that his group was sent by Simatović and Tepavčević. Your Honors, it is significant that Serbian DB employees and associates who operated under Stanišić's direction appeared wherever Arkan appeared. Whether it be Kostić and Kojic in SPWS, Kostić and Pavlović in Zvornik, or Dragan Filipović in Sanski Most, as Ms. Harbour will discuss. The prosecution has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Stanišić and Simatović used the resources and personnel at their disposal to make a significant contribution to the crimes charged in SPWS, Bijeljina, and Zvornik. Ms. Harbour will now continue the prosecution's submissions.
Your Honors, I am going to introduce the third special unit of the Serbian DB, the Scorpions. I will then discuss the joint operations that the unit, SDG, and Scorpions participated in together from 1994 until the end of the indictment period. The evidence of these operations reveals how Stanišić and Simatović used these units to further the common purpose. I will conclude with a discussion of Sanski Most, particularly the SDG's operations and crimes there. All of these operations depended upon the coordination of different JCE members and the organs they controlled, demonstrating that JCE members continued to pursue the common criminal purpose throughout the indictment period. The evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt that both accused are criminally responsible for the charged crimes in Trnovo and Sanski Most. My first point and an overarching theme of my submissions, is that the accused were responsible for the Scorpions. Stanišić and Simatović controlled the Scorpions during the indictment period, using them for special operations in Croatia and Bosnia. Slobodan Medić, the Scorpions commander, referred to Stanišić as his boss and took orders from both accused from at least 1994. Slide 82 sets out some of the evidence showing that the Scorpions were a special unit of the Serbian DB and controlled by both accused. This corroborates the evidence of JF-24 and Stoparić, which both defense teams have challenged in their final trial briefs. In addition, the evidence of the Scorpions' joint operations with the SDG and JATD in 1994 and 1995 unequivocally demonstrates that Stanišić and Simatović were controlling the Scorpions' movements during this entire period, before, during, and after the Trnovo murders. The evidence of these operations also reveals how the accused contributed to the JCE through the Scorpions, SDG, and JATD. I will address the three successive operations in turn, beginning with Operation PAUK. As stated in the prosecution's final trial brief, Operation PAUK was significant for two main reasons. One, it exemplifies the close coordination between JCE members pursuing the common purpose during this period. And two, it is the first in a series of actions where the accused deployed members of all three of the DB special units into combat together. The accused do not dispute that Stanišić was involved in meetings with high-level leaders before and during Operation PAUK. The Mladić notebooks reflect several meetings where the attendees discussed Stanisić's contribution of manpower to PAUK, as reflected on slide 84. At a meeting on 7 October 1994, Stanišić promised to send Simatović.
Miss.
On 8 November, both accused attended a meeting where Stanišić said he had, quote, provided forces strong enough to ensure the liberation of Velika Kladuša and Fikret Abdić's return there, unquote. Indeed, around this time, the Scorpions, SDG, and JATD deployed to PAUK. I refer your honors to slide 85. Zoran Rajic escorted the Scorpions across the border from Serbia into Bosnia and oversaw their activities in PAUK. Witnesses Slišković and JF-24 discussed this in their evidence. The Stanišić defense argues that Operation PAUK was a legitimate, lawfully conducted operation. Curiously, they then argue at paragraph 1032 of their brief that Mladić attempted to implicate Stanišić by the notebook entries showing that Stanišić was personally involved in sending Archon's men and the Scorpions into this operation. The Stanišić defense fails to explain how implicating Stanišić in what they consider to be an entirely legitimate and lawfully conducted operation would benefit Mladić. The Simatović defense does not dispute that Simatović was present in Petrovagora during the PAUK operations on multiple occasions. But they argue that Simatović's role in PAUK was limited to setting up radio surveillance. Similarly, the Stanišić defense argues that Stanisić's only role in the PAUK command involved, quote, members of the JATD involved in security, unquote. Viewed in its totality, the evidence tells a different story. Slide 86 sets out evidence that Stanišić and Simatović spent a significant amount of time in Petrovagora, that the PAUK commander Novaković reported to Stanišić on the operation's progress, and that both accused gave orders to and met with Božović and Legia, the commanders of TG2 and TG3. Božović and Legia, in turn, commanded the JATD, the SDG, and the Scorpions in combat. The Stanišić defense agrees that Božović was a reserve JATD member during PAUK, while the Simatović defense relies on witness Plahuta's claim that Božović never belonged to the JATD. An official JATD note, P3024, describes JATD members' involvement in ambush, sniping, combat training, and identification of, quote, targets for our operations, unquote. The document sets out the combat equipment used, the combat equipment issued to both Božović and Legia, evidence of these two individuals' relationship to the Serbian DB. Stanišić argues that this was probably the only time the JATD engaged in such activities. In light of the totality of the evidence, this argument does not hold water. The prosecution requests that the next slide not be broadcast. The Serbian DB's payment lists for the PAUK period reveal the level of their financial investment in the PAUK operation and their logistical involvement in transferring funds that Abdić provided for the units involved. The Simatović defense has pointed out that the Serbian DB's payment lists included commanders, pilots, and other members of the Army of the Republic of Serb Krajina who were involved in the operation. In addition, groups of JATD members were paid on the same list as Božović, and groups of Tigers were paid on the same list as Legia during this period, as indicated on slide 87. Rajic was also paid during this period that he was overseeing the Scorpions in PAUK. Simatović personally signed some of these payment lists. The fact that the Scorpions do not appear on any Serbian DB payment lists for this or any other period indicates that they may not have been paid by the DB through this vehicle. Their absence from the payment lists does not negate the incontrovertible evidence of their involvement in PAUK under Legia's TG2 and the totality of the evidence that they were there at the behest of the accused. Let us now turn to the Trnovo-Treskovica operation, shortly after PAUK, where JATD member Miović commanded the SDG and Scorpions. During this operation, the Scorpions shot 6 Muslim men and boys in cold blood, while one of them videotaped the entire event. Both defense final trial briefs discuss a meeting that took place before the operation at Baja's office at the Serbian MUP, attended by Kojic, Baja, Medic, Arkan, Murgud, and Ljubo Milojević, the Plavi Brigade commander. At this meeting, Baja said the Scorpions, SDG, and Plavi Brigade should be sent to Trnovo to assist the VRS in combat. Simatović then contacted Arkan in Erdut and arranged for the SDG's participation. I refer your honors to P1666 and the confidential evidence table, items D9 to D11. Kojic ultimately led these 3 units into Trnovo, as indicated in items D12 and D13 on the confidential evidence table. As shown on slide 89 and discussed by Ms. Friedman, Kojic was an official DB employee who by his own account was reporting directly to Stanišić. Through his involvement at the pre-deployment meeting and in leading these units, Kojic was responsible to the accused. During the operations, prominent JATD member Miović commanded the 3 units. Miović was a longtime member of the unit and directly subordinate to the accused, as indicated by the evidence on slide 90. His leadership role in the Trnovo-Treskovica operation is evidence that Stanišić and Simatović were behind this operation. Throughout their involvement in the Trnovo-Treskovica operations, Scorpions, Plavi, and SDG were consistently referred to as Serbian MUP units in official military and police reports, as indicated on slides 91 and 92. The defense offers several arguments to distance the Serbian DB from these units. The Simatović defense argues that the documents referring to Serbian MUP units are mistaken, and that Karadzic had requested the assistance. The Stanišić defense argues that these were called Serbian MUP units because they were subject to Baja and the public security and had nothing to do with the accused and the DB. Stanisić's final trial brief is very misleading, asserting that both JF-29 and JF-24 testified that the Scorpions were reserve forces of the PSI, of public security. Both witnesses were testifying about the 1998 to 1999 period. Aside from this misleading assertion, the defense's characterization of Karadzic and Baja's involvement arises from the evidence and is a crucial part of the prosecution's case, demonstrating the JCE members' deep involvement in furthering the common purpose through the Scorpions' crimes in Trnovo. Nevertheless, the totality of the evidence and the prominent role the accused subordinates Kojic and Miovic played in the Trnovo operations precludes any interpretation that would exclude the Serbian DB's authority over the Scorpions. Both accused challenged the evidence that Miovic commanded these units in the Trnovo-Treskovica operations. In light of all the evidence, the defense challenges should be dismissed. And I would like to ask if we can go into private session for approximately 2 minutes.
We move into private session. Thank you, Madam Registrar.
The next two pieces of evidence are on slide 94 and must be considered together. P1454 is an order from Mladic on 1 July 1995 in response to a 30 June dispatch from the, quote, MUP of Serbia's ATD unit, unquote. Mladic orders, quote, inform us through proper channels if anyone is seriously wounded in the Trnovo sector, unquote. This order was sent to the organs whose subsequent reports refer to the Scorpions, SDG, and Plavi in the Trnovo operations as Serbian MUP units, as I previously discussed. The next document, P1084, is a document on Serbian MUP ATD unit letterhead, signed by Miovic as commander and delivered to the RS MUP in Pale on 19 July 1995. It states that, quote, the ATD unit of the MUP of the Republic of Serbia was ordered to pull back from the zone of combat operations in the Trnova sector by 1200 hours on 20 July 1995, unquote. Together, it is clear from these two documents that A, the Serbian MUP ATD unit was active in Trnovo, and B, Miovic was its commander. The evidence reveals that the Scorpions pulled out of Trnovo 5 days after Miovic's dispatch. These documents independently corroborate the two witnesses I've discussed regarding Mijović's role in Trnovo, commanding Serbian MUP units in July 1995. Another corroborating piece of evidence is P2966, page 7, the testimony of Tomislav Kovač in the Scorpions trial in Belgrade. He testified that Vaso Mijović was the Scorpions commander in Trnovo. The prosecution relies on this evidence only to the extent that it corroborates the other evidence I have just discussed, taking the defense point that Kovač was not cross-examined before this chamber. I will now discuss the SBWS operations after Operation Storm, when the accused pulled the Scorpions, SDG, and JATD together once again. In September 1995 and thereafter, the accused held meetings in the SBWS with high-level military officials. I refer your honors to slide 96. By early September, following an approach similar to that taken in PAOK, 3 operational groups were formed of the DB special units and SVK units. Mijović cooperated with the OG-1 Baranja Command and provided soldiers trained by the JATD. Legia led OG-2, leading around 250 SDG in eastern Slavonia. And Zvezdan Jovanović was deputy commander of OG-3, which included the Scorpions and covered western Srem. I refer your honors to P1080. The pattern of the Scorpions' deployments in 1994 and 1995 demonstrates that they were a unit under the accused's control. For a year, they were deployed into consecutive operations with the SDG and JATD. For each operation, the Scorpions were subordinated to a member of a DB special unit. First Legia in PAOK, then Mijović in Trnovo, and finally Jovanović in the SBWS. For PAOK and Trnovo, DB members Rajic and Kojic escorted them across borders into the combat zone. Both defense teams cling heavily onto evidence that the Scorpions were a unit of the SVK under General Lonchar. As shown on slide 97, P3096 shows that whatever their relationship with the SVK, the accused ultimately controlled the Scorpions' assignments. On 28 August 1995, Božović and other members of the unit took over command of the SVK security organs and provided the Scorpions, called the Bocho Squad, to escort the SVK officials out of town. On 30 October 1995, the SVK reported, quote, "The Serbia State Security is in charge now. Frankie, Jovica, Lončar is nothing but a pawn now." Unquote. In light of the totality of the evidence, there can be no reasonable doubt that the Scorpions were acting as tools of the accused when they persecuted and then murdered 6 Bosniaks near Tornovo. As the Scorpions, SDG, and JATD units were forming operational groups to prepare for combat in SBWS, Arkan led an SDG unit into operations around Sanski Most and Banja Luka. Arkan and the SDG rounded up non-Serb civilians at the Sanus Hotel, then murdered them in groups in the areas of Sasina and Turnova on 20 and 21 September 1995. I will now discuss the accused's liability for these murders, first through the lens of the Mladić notebooks, and then through the lens of the DB payment lists. Both defense teams seek to distance the accused from Arkan and the SDG's activities in Sanski Most. They argue that Arkan was in Sanski Most at the behest of Karadzic and the SDS leadership and working with the RS MUP. Stanišić also points out that the RS government requested Baja to supply men for the operations, resulting in some 400 PJPs being sent from Serbia, where they were also resubordinated to the RS MUP. The evidence on which the defense relies is important and relevant to reveal the deep involvement that JCE members Karadzic, Micho Stanišić, Baja, Mladić, and others had in perpetuating the common criminal purpose along with Arkan in these operations. The evidence is clear that Stanišić and Simatović were also intimately involved in these operations, and I particularly draw the Chamber's attention to a series of Mladić notebook entries in September and October 1995. On slide 100, P2543 reflects that at a meeting among high-level VRS leaders on 22 September 1995, Milovanović reported that a team from the Serbian DB, including Filipović and Božović, had arrived, and 3 brigades from the Serbian DB were promised. Milovanović's testimony at transcript page 15524 is clear that Božović and Filipović were already in the area prior to the SDG's murders. Božović and Filipović were JATD members who were direct subordinates to both accused and paid by the JATD in September and October 1995, as indicated on slide 101. On slide 102 is P2544, which reflects that on 29 September 1995, in a meeting with Mladić, Karadzic stated, quote, "Jovica Stanišić is angry about something. He gave 300 of his men, and the U.S. is begrudging us for having advertised Archon," unquote. This reveals that A, Stanišić was responsible for sending personnel into the Sanski Most area. B, Stanišić was abreast of Archon's role. And C, he communicated with Karadzic about these issues. This meeting between Karadzic and Mladić took place only 6 days after Mladić sent Karadzic a dispatch stating that Archon had identified himself as a member of the MUP of Serbia and RS. And that's P289. Slide 103 shows that the next day, Mladić met with Stanišić and Perisic. Stanisić's report reveals that he was well informed about the situation on the ground in Sanski Most and well informed about Archon's activities. Stanišić stated, quote, "We sent 400 people," unquote. Stanišić interprets that comment as referring to public security PJP units, citing to witness Grikulović's testimony at transcript page 15308 that the chief of the DB could be involved in deploying public security units. Although there is no evidence that Stanišić was referring to public security units in this entry, if the defense is correct, this would be another element of Stanisić's involvement in the operation, on top of supplying and funding JATD and SDG units. On 3 October 1995, Mladić's notebook reflects a meeting with Filipović and Božović, as indicated on slide 104. Filipović reported on Archon's activities, revealing that as a subordinate of the accused, he was well informed about Archon. Božović reported that, quote, "It was agreed that we would replace the RS police," unquote. This again reveals the cooperation among JCE organs in the Sanski Most operations and alludes to units supplied by the accused. In addition to the evidence in the Mladić notebooks, Stanišić and Simatović demonstrated their authority over the SDG in Sanski Most by paying them. The JATD payment list reveal that, as during Operation PAUK, the Serbian DB made payments to the SDG through the end of 1995. Seeking to undercut this powerful evidence against him, Stanišić has presented a number of unsupported theories regarding the per diems. He asserts the possibility that public funds were embezzled, then later asserts that someone in the DB was doing the SDG a favor. The reality is that SDG members known to be in the Stanišić operations received payments in September and October 1995, as indicated on slide 106. The prosecution requests that that slide not be broadcast to the public. The per diems are supported by the evidence that the largest amount the DB ever paid to the SDG was received after the Stanišić operations in September 1995, as indicated on the confidential evidence table, items D 31 and 32. Attempting to distance himself from the payment lists, Stanišić argues, quote, "Logic and the DB's financial processing dictates that Stanišić would not have known who were being paid per diems. This is true even if Simatović paid the per diems himself, as the prosecution suggests," unquote. Simatović, on the other hand, asserts regarding Pauk that he, quote, "played no role and had no influence on the disbursement of wages," unquote, and, quote, "the financial arrangement had been made by Jovica Stanišić," unquote. It should be fairly obvious that the prosecution's case is not that Stanišić would have known by name every individual on the payment lists. Rather, that as chief of the DB, he was the one who set the policy and made the decision about who should be paid, particularly among reserve units and people who were not officially employed by the service. Vujović, a DB employee and defense witness, testified that there were some individuals who on their own initiative engaged in amateur surveillance work in Ilok, and that at some point the 8th administration regularized and began to pay them. When asked whether this decision would have to have been approved by the chief of the DB, Vujović responded, quote, of course, yes," unquote. Further, Stanišić's personal exchanges with many unit members at the Kula ceremony, including Božović, reveals that he was personally acquainted with individuals who appeared on per diems. The video of the Kula ceremony also captures the fact that Stanišić began speaking extemporaneously after giving out awards, thus displaying his personal knowledge about the unit. I will play a portion of this speech now, and the translation is on slide 107, so Stanišić's words do not need to be translated.
There, Frankie is correcting our protocol. We have now actually given out the greatest, the highest awards that can be earned in work of this kind, and these are the awards for valor. Each of you that received this award, be it Opačić in the Knin area, or Đurica in the Banija area, and even the story of us as men who tried to help their people. Each one of them is the same, particularly the way it came about. But in essence, it speaks of the heroism of our people and what we have put into our unit. Inaudible passage. And who will carry on the tradition of this unit.
Stanišić gave this speech after Milošević left the ceremony. This fact alone rebuts the accused's arguments that they were merely putting on a show for Milošević and that their discussion of the unit was exaggerated. In light of the totality of the evidence, there is no escaping that the accused funded and remained well informed about the SDG's operations in Sanski Most and supplied JATD units to assist in the same operations. With this pattern of involvement, there can be no reasonable doubt of the accused's liability for the SDG's crimes in Sanski Most, where they were acting as tools of Arkan and of both accused to further the common criminal purpose. This concludes my submissions, and I will turn the floor over to Mr. Groom.
Your Honors, we have now set forth our case. These remarks, in conjunction with our written submissions, establish a comprehensive and compelling case establishing the crimes charged in the indictment and the accused's responsibility for them. I want to spend a few of these last remaining moments on the issue of a possible sentence. Both of the accused put forward their role in the hostage crisis as meriting mitigation. The prosecution accepts and recognizes that their role in this event may be appropriately considered by the chamber should it find them guilty of crimes. It is important to recognize when doing so that their involvement in the crimes charged in this indictment continued throughout and after this period. Their participation in the crimes in Sanski Most through Arkan and in Turnovo through the Scorpions both took place around the time of the hostage crisis. Their efforts to free the UN personnel held hostage by the VRS was not a watershed withdrawal from the JCE, but an effort to mitigate a situation which the JCE perceived had the potential to ultimately damage their goals. Having said this, the prosecution does recognize that both Mr. Stanišić and Mr. Simatović personally entered Bosnia and Herzegovina during a very dangerous period. The likelihood of additional airstrikes by NATO was real. the likelihood that some members of the VRS would physically resist handing over the hostages was real. The prosecution recognizes that both men willingly assumed dangers to their personal safety and brought over 300 UN personnel to safety. The prosecution notes that the fact that the accused were able to enter Bosnia during such a volatile period and secure the release of the hostages corroborates the other evidence in this case and demonstrates once again the positions of significant influence they yielded. The Stanišić defense puts forward Mr. Stanisić's health and advanced age. The prosecution recognizes that he did, for the most part, cooperate with respect to health issues as they impacted the trial, something which allowed the trial to make regular progress. But this trial did not cause or aggravate his illnesses. They are chronic conditions that he would deal with irrespective of the trial. The prosecution does accept that Mr. Stanišić played a positive role in the Dayton Peace Accords. He helped unify a fractious delegation and facilitated the ultimate acceptance of the plan by the Bosnian Serbs. One of the most significant factors for a chamber to consider in assessing an appropriate sentence is the gravity of the offenses an accused is convicted of. This is a two-part consideration by a trial chamber of both the seriousness of the underlying crimes and the form and degree of an accused's participation. Should this chamber find the two accused guilty of all of the crimes on the indictment, it would be difficult to imagine crimes of greater severity. The crimes charged in the indictment involved thousands of victims directly impacted by the crimes. Crimes which have lasting consequences to this day. Crimes that will continue to impact lives long after this chamber enters its judgment. The last witness in the prosecution's case in chief was the son of one of the men whose murder by the Scorpions was recorded on video. He recounted for you the day when the television news played as he sat in a cafe in a country far from the former Yugoslavia. As he watched the tape, he had a sense that the man in the video was his father, the man begging his captors for water. A sense that was confirmed shortly afterward. He watched his very own father being murdered by the Scorpions. Since that day, every time he sees something as commonplace as a glass of water, he is reminded of his father's suffering, his mother's loneliness, his own suffering growing up without his father. Your Honors, this is but one example of the suffering of the many who struggle through their lives, deeply and daily impacted by the crimes of Mr. Stanišić and Mr. Simatović. Should this chamber come to the conclusion that the evidence established beyond reasonable doubt the accused's criminal responsibility, then they must accept responsibility for the gravity of those crimes. They must be held to account for the great suffering they occasioned. It is for that reason that despite the existence of mitigating factors, that I now ask, on behalf of the prosecutor, Mr. Brommertz, that the chamber impose a sentence of life incarceration should the chamber find them guilty of these crimes. Before I conclude, the prosecution recognizes the many witnesses who appeared to give their evidence during this trial. For the victims, it was often a difficult experience to recount what happened to them. A large number of the witnesses were of Serb ethnicity, who were either present in the areas where the crimes were committed or were members of the special units of the Serbian DB. They have appeared before this tribunal because of the strength of their conviction in the importance of the truth. The prosecution also recognizes the cooperation of the government of Serbia. It provided some of the most relevant documentation when requested to do so, and allowed former government officials to give evidence. Judges in its courts facilitated our work, and the Ministry of Interior assisted when the security of witnesses was a concern. Serbia has made an important contribution to the truth. It is my hope that the Chamber's judgment, be it conviction or acquittal, gives the people of Serbia a deeper understanding of the events that had such a deep impact on that country. Your Honors, that concludes our submissions here today. Thank you for receiving them.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. I think it would not be a good idea to start the closing argument by the defense, but rather give you time and do it tomorrow, Mr. Jordash.
Thank you, Honors.
What will be the sequence? Will it be Stanišić defense first?
Yes, it will.
Yes. And I think we've reserved 2.5 hours for each defense team. Then we adjourn for the day, and we will resume tomorrow, Wednesday, the 30th of January at 2:15 p.m. in this same courtroom, 3.
All rise, Vivi Leve.